Thank you very much, Mila, for these very kind words of introduction. And thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see so many old friends here, once again in the Newton Institute. It's been quite a long time since I was director here, but I have been involved in one or two of the programs over the last 25 years or so. And it's always a great pleasure to come back to this wonderful institute. This was originally conceived as a book lunch, but somebody slipped in the A to make it a book launch. It's the first time I've done a book launch, so forgive me if I get things wrong. I will make a few little readings from the book, just to give you an idea of what it's all about. I can find the copy that I've marked. I think we have that one here. And forgive me if my voice gives out. That's one problem when you, I should admit my age. You know, I reached the age of 90 earlier this year. And I thought I'd better say that at the beginning in case I collapse during the talk. And then you will understand the reason. Anyway, this, I wanted to pay tribute first to my supervisor, who meant a great deal to me, and he figures quite a lot in the first few chapters of the book, George Batchelor. This is how he was in 1956. And you see the sort of telephone communications we had in those days. He was the founding editor of the Journal of Fluid Mechanics, which also played quite a part in my life and still does in the department next door. And 3 years later, he founded the Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics, 1959. I started my research under his supervision in 1958, so I was involved with him really from the very beginning. And in a way, this is where my story begins as far as my research career was concerned. So this is the book. I think you've all seen it by way of the flyer that was distributed. I think many people think that the cover is the best part of the book. And it is a wonderful photograph. This, I think, was taken by Jörg Allén, who I knew, a friend of a friend, photograph of the steam vortex emitted by the eruption of Mount Etna just into the new millennium. Of course, Mount Etna has erupted again this year. I think it was in March this year. It does so every once in a while. And this is a very remarkable phenomenon, and it seemed to fit the theme of the book quite well, because it's a very turbulent state of affairs, and it is very clearly a vortex ring. The question that always arises, why did I write the book? Well, of course, at the age of 90, you still have some memories of these earlier times, and it's as well to, I think, at some point, put the memories on record while you still can. That was my motivation. But firstly, let me say a word or two about the Newton Institute, encouraged as I was in this by Mila. This was the day that the formal opening of the Newton Institute. It was in 1992, so already, I think, 30-something years ago. Here you see Prince Philip. He was Chancellor of the university at the time. Here is Michael Atiyah on the right. He was the founding director of the Newton Institute, very much supported by Peter Goddard, who was the deputy director at that time. Myself, I was organizing one of the programs, one of the two programs that started off the Newton Institute in 1992, the one on dynamo theory. And my two co-organizers were Andrew Soward here and Uriel Frisch from the Observatoire de Nice in France. Very sadly, Andrew died just 2 months ago. He was very active up to the end of his life, very much involved with Emmanuel Dormy, who is here today, and close collaborator with Andrew. And I'd known him. Andrew was one of my research students back in the 1960s, one of my first research students. And we held a gathering in Newcastle for his 80th birthday just over a year ago. There was another royal event involving me some years later when I had succeeded Michael Atiyah as director of the Newton Institute. This was in 1998, 99. We put in for the Queen's Anniversary Prize, the Newton Institute, on behalf of the University of Cambridge, and of course we won it. Well, we weren't the only. There are quite a number of universities each year that win this prize. But anyway, we won one of the prizes, and this was the prize ceremony. And I remember there was a more informal gathering after this formality here. This was Alec Browers, who was at that time Vice-Chancellor of the university, and he naturally accompanied me for this ceremony at Buckingham Palace. After the ceremony, there was a very informal reception, and we had been, well, I'd been invited to take 7 students. Well, the Newton Institute doesn't have students, but it has usually a number of postdoc visitors, sometimes research students also. And I managed to gather together 7, a mixture of postdocs and research students, all from different countries. I wanted to emphasize the very international nature of this institute. And they came with me to Buckingham Palace, and the Queen was wandering around, chatting to everyone at the informal reception. And she came to one of my postdocs, and in her usual way, she asked very kindly, "What do you do?" And he said, he was a cosmologist working in cosmology in the group of Stephen Hawking here next door. And he said, "I study the origins of the universe, ma'am." And the Queen was quite taken aback by this statement and didn't, I think, quite know how to respond. And she said, "Well, how very interesting," and moved on to the next. Well, as I say, why did I write the book? The first chapter of the book concerns the international congresses of theoretical and applied mechanics, ICTAMs as we call them, which are quadrennial congresses. They're held every 4 years, intercalated with the international congresses of mathematics. And I discovered, I went to the Congress in South Korea, accompanied by my younger daughter, Penelope, who you see here with me, in a restaurant in Seoul when we had just arrived off a flight from Heathrow. And moving on to the Congress in Daegu in the south of South Korea. And I discovered when I was at this Congress that I had attended more of these congresses than anyone else in the world. So I think this is a necessary condition for writing an autobiography. You need to broken a record, a world record. It should be in the Guinness Book of Records. I'd attended 15 of these as I say, they're just once every 4 years, 15 of them since 1960, so you can figure it out. That was indeed a world record, and I was given a prize. This was the prize for, I call it the longevity prize, for having attended so many congresses. But anyway, this is where we were hungry when we arrived in Seoul, and we went to a restaurant. We discovered halfway through the meal that it was a karaoke restaurant. We were required to perform. So Penelope sang, "It's Been a Hard Day's Night," the Beatles song, of course, which everybody knows, even everyone in South Korea is familiar with this song, and so they all joined in. It's been a hard day's night, I should be sleeping like a log, and I did feel it was very appropriate because daytime in Seoul is nighttime in the UK, and so it really was a hard day's night. So that was the situation when we arrived in Korea. Let me see. There in red are all the congresses that I attended over the years, including this latest one in Daegu. And you see there, it's very much international. They're all over the place. I've attended those in red. This was the only one I missed. The family was growing up at that stage, and things were getting a little bit difficult. I'll come back to that. And I hope to attend the next one in Vienna in 2028, and I hope to see many of you there. This is where I'll read the first extract from my book. I can find it. Yes, I mentioned here on the slide Theodore von Karman, very eminent, oops, sorry, let's go back one. Here, von Karman, who eminent mathematician and aerospace engineer. He initiated these congresses in Innsbruck in 1922, so it's going quite a long way back. And then you see these were the various congresses up to 1956, and then Stresa 1960, which was the first one that I attended. 1 year later, he attended a very famous small conference in Marseille on turbulence colloquium 1961, which is where I took this photograph of him, von Karman, chatting with George Batchelor. Batchelor was, his mentor was G.I. Taylor, very, very eminent engineering scientist, perhaps one of the most eminent of the 20th century, and based at the Cavendish Laboratory here in Cambridge. Well, here's the little excerpt that I'd like to read you. Theodore von Karman was present at the Colloque International sur la mécanique de la turbulence, held in 1961 in Marseille. This was a more compact gathering of about 60 participants with a single session of lectures every day for a week. I recall that von Karman would arrive in the lecture hall about 5 minutes late every morning when the first lecturer of the day was just launched into his presentation. He, von Karman, would come slowly down the central aisle, shaking hands warmly with those on both sides, while we all stood in recognition of his eminence and authority. This arrival ended with von Karman embracing G.I. Taylor and settling down with him in the front row. Only then could the distracted lecturer resume his presentation. I shook hands with von Karman on this occasion, making me one of the few surviving links with the origin of ICTAM, these congresses, and hence of IUTAM, that is the International Union of Theoretical and Applied Mechanics, which wasn't founded until just after the war, 1948. Right, well, let me continue. I keep an eye on the clock there. That tells me not the time, but how many minutes I have still to go. So that's very helpful. It's a clock that runs backwards, in other words. I took my first degree at Edinburgh University, and this appears in chapter 2 of the book, which I describe as my preconditioning. And I sat at the feet of this very famous and evident, mathematician, a numerical prodigy, numerical genius, actually, A.C. Aitken. Many of you may be familiar with a little book he wrote on determinants and matrices. That's what we all learnt the subject from when we were at Edinburgh University. He was an absolutely brilliant lecturer, partly because he ceased to lecture. It would be a 1-hour lecture, and after 3/4 of an hour, he would stop lecturing on mathematics and just tell us stories about his life, or do magical demonstrations of his extraordinary numerical ability on the blackboard. And it was all extremely entertaining. Well, you know, this is familiarity with numbers. I take this from the web, actually. Helped him translate them into more memorable forms. When confronted with the number 1961, for example, he immediately saw that it could be decomposed in these 3 different ways. It's a bit like the skill of Ramanujan. I mean, numbers were just in his mind all the time. Now, I show you this because of the second extract that I want to read you about this man. I recall running into Professor Aitken some years after leaving university at the harbour of St. Abbs, Berwickshire, where he was watching a group of young fishermen competing with each other in attempting to throw stones right across the harbour to hit the wall on the other side. I think we were based around here, and it was a question of hitting this wall here. And it's quite a major throw. I certainly couldn't do it myself. Aitken, then in his 60s, and looking very much the elderly professor, picked up a smooth stone and prepared to join the contest. The fisherman looked on in some amusement. Aitken swung his arm vigorously in a highly unconventional way and released the stone in an underarm throw. Did it in this way. Accelerating, and then he caught his arm here, and the hand accelerated. He released the stone. It was extraordinary to watch. He, underarm throw, it hit the far wall to the amazement of the onlookers. He explained to them, the fishermen, that he had adopted the principle of angular momentum, conservation of angular momentum, treating his arm as a compound pendulum. I meant to work out that theory, and I haven't done so, but you could all do it on the back of an envelope. If you have a compound pendulum and you suddenly bring it to rest here, does your hand accelerate? That is the question. That is what Aitken maintained. So I won't read an extract on this, but I just wanted to draw your attention to it because I think it was the most exciting moment of my research life. The discovery of an invariant of the Euler equations of fluid mechanics. And after all, Euler's equations had been around for 200 years at that time, and there were the invariants of energy and momentum, angular momentum, very, very well known. And here, suddenly, a new invariant appeared, and I gave it the name helicity. And how did I come on this? Well, I'd been lecturing on every year a Part 3 course in Cambridge on magnetohydrodynamics. And in one of the lectures of that course, I would explain a result that had been proved, as stated anyway, by Vulture, an astronomer, in a paper in 1958. And it was that there was a certain integral invariant, and B here was magnetic field, and A was the vector potential of this magnetic field. And under suitable conditions, he showed that this integral is a constant. And I gave his proof, but I was troubled every year because I couldn't give a physical interpretation of, and I always like to couple the mathematics with some kind of physical interpretation of what it means. And it wasn't until 1967, I think it was, that the penny dropped. And I realized that this is an invariant simply because the lines of force, that is to say the B lines, as I call them, are transported with the fluid when it's perfectly conducting fluid. And therefore any knots or linkages of this field are conserved. And therefore, this actually must be a topological invariant. But in that case, it must also be an invariant for any other vector field and any other circumstance where such a field is transported with the fluid. And the well-known field of that kind is what's known as vorticity, the curl of the velocity field in an ideal fluid, as described by Euler in 1756. So this must be an invariant. And indeed, I was able to prove quite easily that it is invariant, and to give it its proper topological interpretation. And that has led to an enormous developments. I mentioned here Helmholtz 100 years earlier, because in 1858 he had recognized that vortex lines are transported with an ideal fluid. And Kelvin took that idea up very much and used it in his theory of vortex atoms in 1868. And that led to the development of knot theory more in the pure mathematics side. Huge developments in knot theory pioneered by Peter Guthrie Tait at the University of Edinburgh. And that, incidentally, was the main subject of the other first program of the Newton Institute in 1992. I mentioned here Jean-Jacques Moreau, but I won't go into the details of this because he had written a very relevant paper, which I only discovered much later, published in French in the Compte Rendu of the French Academy. And it had received no citations over the next 20 years until I was able to cite the paper in a paper that I wrote in 1981. And from then on, it's been cited a large number of times, which is, of course, what it deserved. I said I would come to a family situation. That same year, 1967, was when our fourth child, this is Penelope again, Penelope was born. And you see here, there are four. Now there were four. Hester is here. There she is. Hester is here with two of her children. and her husband, Freddie. And I'm very glad to welcome them also. But you see, she was already playing a dominant role in this young family: Hester, Peter, Fergus, and Penelope. There were 4. And we lived in this quite large house on Barton Road, 67 Barton Road. It was actually large enough to accommodate not only the family, but additional lodgers. And in 1970, I think it was, we had one particular lodger, Antonio Tablas, and I want to read you a little excerpt about him. And here it is. One of our lodgers at Barton Road around this time was Antonio Tablas from Lanestoja in the Basque region of Spain. He arrived speaking no English, but was learning fast with the chatter of our children all around him. Once we had a full day family outing, and we left Antonio with instructions to feed the cat while we were away. When we arrived home, he greeted us with a huge smile and said proudly, "I have eaten the cat." At which our children burst into tears and were inconsolable until the language difficulty had been resolved. And like Schrodinger's cat, the cat's living existence could be established. Well, so much. I mean, a lot of the book is concerned with certain tensions between one's research and duties as an academic generally, and the stresses that arise in the home environment. Of course, I must pay tribute to my wife, Linty, who is far too nervous to come to gatherings of this kind, so she's not here. But she was always at home to absorb the stresses at home. And she's the worrier, so I was never, I didn't worry about anything. I left it all to Linty to do the worrying. And that was very important. This was about a meeting in Poland in 1973, in the far east of Poland. I'm just keeping an eye on that clock. Is that, was that set to an hour or to half an hour?
I don't know. I'll go and find out.
I think I should be stopping now, shouldn't I? It was set to 1 hour. You made a mistake. Well, I will stop in a moment. Let me just say a word about, I won't say a word about, notice Arnold here, very important. He visited Cambridge a few times, and I do want to, I'll have to skip that one because time won't permit, but I want to tell you something about Arnold, and then I very nearly done, because this clock was terribly misleading.
We can have bits during the question time as well.
You forgive me if I go over the time just a little because of this little problem with the clock. Oh, maybe I have slide 10. Oh, I think I've lost Arnold. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Arnold. I've lost him. I just have to tell you the. Oh no, here it is. I invited Arnold to give the Rouse Ball lecture in Cambridge, a lecture intended to be accessible to mainly undergraduate audience. We arranged this for November 1988, when it became possible for him to get a visa to travel from Moscow to the UK. He arrived in Cambridge on a Saturday. the lecture being scheduled for the following Monday morning. I invited him home on the Sunday and took him a walk by the towpath down the River Cam for lunch at Clayhythe. When we got there, he decided to have a swim before lunch, stripped naked and plunged into the river. He swam across and back, shook himself dry, dressed and declared himself ready for lunch. It fell to me to introduce him to a large audience of undergraduates the following morning. I naturally summarized his brilliant record of research, but when I added that he had swum across the Cam the previous day, a cold November morning, it was this that got the greatest round of applause. Well, given the time, I have to jump. I think, Mila, you wanted me to recite one short poem. There is a chapter of my poetry at the end. I'm going to skip all this and skip this, but this is my, I hope I can find this poem in the chapter on poetry, and then I will stop, or at least throw this open to any comments, questions, etc. Yes, this, if you look out the window here, you can see the apple tree, and it's flourishing. It's really wonderfully growing extremely well. It's one of Newton's trees, cutting from the original tree in Woolsthorpe Manor that Newton obviously sat under, and very unwisely. So that tree was transplanted to this position, and it was just after I'd passed on the directorship to John Kingman, who invited my wife Linty to wield this silver spade and, in effect, throw the shovel of earth to start the planting of the tree. So I thought it appropriate to write a little sonnet to mark the occasion, and this is how it goes. When Newton pondered 'neath the apple tree and hidden truths of nature did discern, 3 universal laws he did decree, that those who seek might ever heed and learn. There in the orchard did his mind take flight, o'er vistas wide where only he could dare, and to the planets, having raised his sight, resolved their orbits through the inverse square. This tree, transported here from leafy glade, of self-same strain that tasted Woolsthorpe's dew, well planted now, through grace of silvered spade, may stir the inquiring mind to conquests new. Symbol of arts, well nurtured at the root, that may, through budding genius, harvest fruit. Thank you.
Apologies for the clock, and I can hear the desire for you to carry on with some of these slides. So please do carry on for a bit longer, and maybe if there's questions at the same time, we can open it out to the floor. It's a very informal event, so.
You really mean it?
I mean it.
Well, all right, let me go back. One or two of the... Ames Senegal is interesting. I think Ames is the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. And I was very much involved with Neil Turok in the original setting up of this, I don't know where it is, the setting up of Ames Ames, Senegal. I have to look up my own index. The index should tell me where Senegal is to be found. Yes, I'm sorry about this. Yes, page 155. If the index is accurate, yeah. Well, here's Ames, Senegal. Yes. You see, Senegal on the coast of, on the west coast of Africa. Actually, there are several. Here's Senegal here. There's also names in Ghana and one in Cameroon, which is this large country here. And I visited all of them on their, when they were founded. But Senegal was interesting. And if I go there, that's a zoom in. This is all Senegal, Dakar, the capital, and down the Atlantic coast, Mabour is, it's about 100 kilometers a drive down here. And I describe here the drive back from Mabour to Dakar after the opening of this. And I say the return journey to Dakar was as hair-raising as the journey to Mabour. But now the taxi driver simply left the road when faced with any hold-up and made a detour across the rough, sandy scrub to circumvent it, so that we arrived in good time at the airport for my onward flight to Cape Town. Cape Town was where the original Ames Centre was established, and I was going on there. But here, I ran into a different problem, for it appeared that I needed a yellow fever vaccination certificate before boarding the flight. I had not known of this requirement previously. Anyway, the immigration officers kindly said that they could have me vaccinated immediately. And they led me to a dingy room in the airport where an even dingier medical officer sat behind a desk. I was very apprehensive about being vaccinated in such a place, but he merely asked me for $10 and in return gave me an authentic-looking certificate. Which enabled me to board the plane with great relief and without further problems. I think really that's enough.